So what is a resume? I feel like this is maybe something that we take for granted sometimes, and we think, oh, everyone should know what a resume is. But do you? I didn't know. So let's explore this thing. So a resume is basically, at its core, a professional summary of your background and qualifications. By presenting your resume to somebody, it says, I would like for you to hire me. Here is a document that is socially acceptable to convey that I would like to be hired and why you should hire me. And what it contains is a number of different sections, some of which you may include, some of which you may not. Most people know about education, so listing where you went to college, if you have any certificates, usually sometimes where you went to high school as well. Most people know about work experience, but how to organize that information, there's some debate about. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Lesser known ones are career objectives. Where does this job fit into the career that you want to have? Like, do you just want to gain certain skills or experience and then move on, or is this where you would like to be? Also, activities, sometimes they are appropriate to include if they're relevant to the job. So examples of activities could be, you volunteer with a local youth group, or maybe you've been in a program, like the Wedgeworth Leadership Institute or something to that effect. And then finally, awards. Maybe you've won some awards that are applicable that you would want to list. It kind of depends on the job that you're applying for and what makes you look best. Last point on this slide, most people think that they create a resume to get a job, but that's not actually the case. You create a resume to get an interview. And so that's good because it takes a little bit of the pressure off. Because if I'm putting together a resume and I think that this is the only thing that's going to stand between me and getting a job, I'm going to want to put in so much information, and that's not really the case. And so that takes a little bit of pressure off. And so when you're deciding what information goes in, you don't have to give every little detail about everything that you've done. You need to put in enough to pique the interest of the person that's reading the resumes and to show that you're qualified for the job. And we'll talk about interviewing skills later in the course, but just know that your resume doesn't get you a job, it gets you an interview. So let's talk about some resume essentials. These are the bare bones basics that you need to get right in order to get a job. First, you need to limit your resume to about 1 to 2 pages. There's a little bit of debate about this. In certain circles, it's different for different industries. But most people settle on between 1 to 2 pages. Any more than that, and it gets really boring. Because remember, they don't have to read your resume in the way that I do as your instructor, where I have to grade you. So you need to be succinct enough that the things that are important for them to know jump out at them rather, in a short amount of time, as opposed to documenting everything that you've ever done in 5 to 10 pages. So you want to limit it for 1 to 2 pages. No less than a size 10 font. What happens a lot of times is people think, oh, I have so much information and I got to make this page count, and so I'm going to make the font really small and then it'll fit. And that's really terrible because people get it and then they're like, I can't read this, it's too small. And while we're on the topic of fonts, use a legible font, one that is clear, both in heading form and in the body of the resume, like where you actually write the information. And so while we're talking about it, no Comic Sans ever in this course, none. Also on the list of never to be used, papyrus and, what was the other one? I can't remember. There's a couple that really irritate me. So stick to some more standard sort of classic formal fonts. Times New Roman is boring, but at least it's legible and acceptable. So that's a good one. Also, Arial is a good sans serif font. Calibri is a good one as well. If you want to get fancy, you can go Garamond or Palatino Linotype. Check it out. If you have questions about which font to use, if you want to stand out but don't know if you're, crossing some kind of line, that's something that you can ask us during class when you're actually writing. Be glad to talk to you about that. It's not on my slide here, but while we're talking about it, if you get the opportunity to print your resume, do it on good paper. What happens a lot of times is people roll up and they're like, here's my resume, and they turn it in, and it's 24-pound paper, which is just copy paper weight, and it just feels cheap. And so, since you're only printing like 2 pages, go ahead and have it printed on some nice paper. You don't have to buy the paper. It's probably cheaper actually in an economy of scale sort of way to have it printed professionally, like a FedEx, because then you're only buying 2 sheets and you don't have to buy the whole box of, you want like 60 pounds or heavier, usually with some cotton or linen in it. And then that way, when the person that's hiring is sifting through a stack of resumes, paper resumes, yours stands out because it feels nice and it looks more professional. On that same note, if you get yours printed, if you have the opportunity to print and turn in a resume, do it on a LaserJet printer. Don't do it on your inkjet printer in your dorm room, because what happens is the ink runs when it gets wet and it smudges when people have their thumbs on it. Laser, I don't know how it works. It's like magic, but essentially they have toner and then they burn it into the page. And so if it gets wet or if it smudges, like, it's never gonna like actually smudge. And then use the spell check, triple check for typos. I'm not sure typo is an actual word, which is kind of funny, because again, the resume is only 1 to 2 pages. If I'm hiring you and you give me your resume and it's only 2 pages and it has typos and spelling errors in it, I think, man, this kid can't get it right when he's only got 2 pages to work with. And so what's that going to be like when he's churning out stuff for me or working elsewhere? It just kind of shows like a lack of attention to detail. Does that make sense? Great, let's move on. So top 10 resume pet peeves. This is from monster.com. Number 1, of course, the spelling errors, typos, and poor grammar. We'll talk more about grammar as we get into the writing of your resume. I'll tell you briefly right now, you typically don't write in full sentences in resumes. You use sort of a truncated thing. So you would never say, I worked at this place from this time to blah, 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 and then end with a period. You would just say, worked here, gained this experience, sharpen sublids at home, and make big money. Anyway, number 2, too duty oriented. This is the thing that people do when they don't know how to write in a way to present themselves. They just list stuff that they did. And while you need to talk about your experience, you need to talk about it in a way that the potential employer can look at and say, this kid can work here and do a good job because he's talked about skills versus what he actually did. See, whenever you talk about what you did, whether it's I can run this machinery or we planted this particular plant or worked with this particular breed of cow, that just tells you what you did. It doesn't talk about skills that are transferable. And so the employer has to make the jump then and say, oh, this kid did this here. He'll probably be able to do this at my job. And so whenever you go beyond talking about duties and talk more about experience and skills that you gained and how you can be beneficial to the new employer, then that takes some of the work out of it for them. If that doesn't make sense now, we'll talk about it in class. Inaccurate dates or no dates at all. This is a really bad thing, right? Especially in a chronological resume. If you're missing dates or if you've got no dates, then I don't know where you were for that period of time, because the dates are to show a trajectory of your career. And if you're missing, 5 to 10 years in there, I don't know where you were. Like, did you take time off to be with a newborn child, or were you incarcerated? Who knows? Anyway, so always list your dates to show that you've moved from one position to the next. Hopefully none of you have been incarcerated. What are we on now? Number 4, inaccurate or missing contact information. I feel like this is job 1. If you want somebody to call you and say, hey, you got an interview, they have to be able to call you. So get your information correct. While I'm thinking about it, a lot of templates have a current address, permanent address, and then people will fill that in. So what you need to do is just pick the one that you're going to be at, because if I'm an employer and I get this resume and it's got 2 sets of contact information, it's very frustrating because I don't know which are they at their permanent place or their temporary place. I don't know. They submitted this application 6 months ago, and so just pick one and stick with it, because generally they're just going to call you or email you. They're not actually going to visit you at your address. Anyway, formatting, number 5. Formatting is more important than you think. Most people want to get fixated on the content, but what you need to remember is that people will never make it to your content if the format makes it difficult to read. I, as your teacher, am required to read your resumes. The person that is hiring you doesn't. And so they, may have a stack of resumes to read through. And so formatting is important because if it's a challenge to get at the information because it's so poorly organized, they're just going to pass on you and move to the next person. So don't skimp on formatting. Functional resumes, we're going to talk about this. This is actually one of the ones that we not necessarily recommend, but we say is okay. So that just goes to show that there's some debate. Long resumes, though, everybody pretty much agrees that they're no good because who wants to read 8 pages? I want to read enough to, be able to decide that you're qualified and that I want to meet you, and then we'll go from there. Really long paragraphs. A lot of times in resumes, they'll tell you to, list your experience in bullet form. You don't necessarily have to do it in bullet form. You can have paragraphs, but you don't want to make them so long that it's hard to access the information in them. So, like you get lost trying to skim through it because most people will skim through. So if you do decide to do paragraphs, keep them short. Number 9, unqualified candidates. I would tell you on your end, shoot for the moon. Apply for a job even if you are doubting yourself. This is remember, these are pet peeves for people that are hiring, and in this case, the heck with them. So number 10, personal information unrelated to the job. Remember when we talked about activities like 5 minutes ago, and I said activities are good, but only if they're relevant. This is what I mean by this. So if I'm applying for a finance job, and I talk about how much I love hiking in the outdoors, that's irrelevant. They're going to read that and go, man, I wasted my time reading about this guy's hobbies, because that's not going to help him in his job in finance. Now, the flip side of that is that if you're a wildlife major and you're applying for a job where you're largely going to be working outdoors, tagging animals or whatever you all do, then that would be a relevant thing. All right, pre-resume preparation. And believe me, you should prepare. Everything will go so much better if you just prepare. So first job, research the information, like research the job that you're applying for. And like we talked about earlier, remember that you're selling and the person that could potentially hire you is buying. And so you want to present yourself in a way that is they're going to look at you and say, this person is the right person for the job that I want, that I need somebody to do. And you got to get to that point in your head whenever you're organizing your information, as opposed to what makes me look great in a general sense. And so what you can do, you want to present the things that you're good at, the things that you're, most qualified or stand out in, but in a way that the person will recognize as being, fitting their job, like at the where all of that meets, where the desired qualifications, your experience, and your skills, where they meet. That's the part that you want to highlight. And if that's confusing, then we'll talk about it in class. I understand that it's kind of a concept that's difficult to get your mind around. And then so in doing that, like you want to present yourself that you're the best candidate, which not only means that you're qualified, but also means that you're a good fit. And so I say, take some time, read the website. Maybe they have a philosophy statement, maybe they have corporate values or mission statement, and kind of get those, because if you're applying and you're way off base with, what you want to do in life and what you want to do in your career, then they're just going to pass over you. Another way to do this, the website's a good place to start. Most of you, I feel like, will apply in a position where you knew somebody within the corporation or a business or organization. And so it's totally okay to call those people and talk to them and say, hey, I'd just like to talk to you about the position. Like, what is the environment that I'm going to be working in like? And then use that inside information sort of to sort of tailor your resume and cover letter to match. And I'll give you an example because I know that's confusing. So this is a personal example. So whenever I applied to be an extension agent in a county in South Florida, that job is very different depending on what county you're in. And so I called up some people that I knew who were volunteers within the county program, and I said, what is the situation? And they said, well, there was a person who was here for 25 years, and then they left, and they really want somebody to completely rebuild the program top to bottom. And so whenever I presented myself, not only as qualified, but also as a good fit, I stress things like I work well alone or independent, that I'm a self-starter, that I enjoy being creative and meeting clients' needs and such. And that's a very different sort of situation than if I'd gone in and they'd said, we really just want somebody to carry on the program as it exists. Because if I'd read my resume and that's what I wanted, I'd say, oh, this kid isn't going to be happy here because he wants to create new things and be self-starting, and I just need somebody that's going to do exactly what I need them to do in the way that I want them to do it. And so that wouldn't have been a good match. And we can talk more about that in class if it's unclear to you. But to try to get an idea of what it is that they're looking for and then present yourself accordingly. Great. Now let's talk about your homework. You may have actually already done this earlier in the semester, but now's the moment at which I'm going to explain it to you. So we're going to need you to fill out your job search information sheet. This is so I can make sure that the job that you are going to be applying for or internship that you're going to be applying for is legitimate, something that you could reasonably do. So you'll want to go ahead and log on to Scholar in the writing page here. You're going to click on Unit 1, Employability. And then, I don't know if you've seen this yet. I find these things hysterical. I have all the necessary qualifications. Some of you laughed. Anyway, you click on Resume. And then what you're looking for is right here, the job search information sheet. I have it pulled up already. And basically, this is just some information, A, for me to know what you're doing, B, for you to know what you're doing. So you want to find like the actual real name of the company or school that you're applying for. How did you find out about the company? This is, will tell me, do you know somebody within the company? Have you been affiliated with it in the past in any way? Because that kind of information is important whenever it comes to writing your cover letter. I need you to know about the products and services rendered. Some of you, I think, you take for granted that you know everything that a business does. But I think if you get online and start searching around, you'll be surprised. They probably do way more than you think. And then that will be beneficial for you. Maybe not so much whenever you're doing your resume, but if you go for an interview, if it shows that you've done your research about the company. How big is the company? Number of employees. Any relevant subsidiaries, meaning does it own other smaller businesses? And then this is important, supervisor or head. And this is because whenever you write your cover letter, you will usually always want to direct this to a real person. And so you'll need their address as well. So do your very best to find out who the hiring authority is. At most smaller companies, it's going to be somebody. It may be the person that listed the position to begin with. If you can't find that, then there's usually a director of HR that you can then list as the person that would be the hiring authority. If you have trouble with this, just let us know. And then find a current article online, anything that's up to date about your company. Is it in the news? If you're applying to Monsanto, shouldn't be a problem to find all kinds of good conflictual stuff out there about that. But find something that is up to date and then give me a little bit summary of it just to show that you know what's going on in your company's current state. The price of its stock and what it's trending. This may be a good thing for you to look into. You don't want to sign on to a company if it's going downhill, if it's public though. If you're applying to a university, you want to check out whatever its endowments are or any kind of research funding. You can usually find that pretty easily with Google. And any additional comments that you think I need to know. So that's that. Secondly, another bit of homework for you is the What Are My Skills worksheet, which is right here. I have it brought up over here. And yes, this is from 4-H. It's meant for high schoolers. It's still going to be good for you, though, I promise. And what this does is because most of you, again, will think about your job in terms of what you did. So I did X, Y, and Z. This will help you translate it into skills. And so the way that you complete this is you just write any number of jobs or internships that you've had along the top here, and then you go down through and you read all these, and maybe it applies to you, and if it applies to you, then you check it. And then you can come back and steal this kind of verbiage for whenever you make your resume. It may be useful to you, it may not. I think that it will. So go ahead and print that out and do that and bring it to class.